Okay, so in this video, we're going to take a look at the MED, or the multi-exit discriminator. And you know, the interesting thing is that a lot of people here get confused with the MED because the MED is also what we call the metric. They are one and the same. So when you go in and you say show IP BGP, you say show IP BGP, and you look at the BGP table and you see metric, that is also the MED, or the multi-exit discriminator. So I want to just kind of get that out of the way right now so that you guys understand that they are one and the same. So remember that these guys are going to be optional, okay? And in detail, they are optional, non-transitive, okay? So don't forget that particular attribute about the multi-exit discriminator. Now, a few things about the MED. First of all, the MED is only going to be compared by default. So by default, when ASs are the same. And I'll explain what that means in a minute, when ASN equals the same. The MED is used to basically determine which path we're going to use as essentially our next hop, right? I mean, we're talking about our next hop, or our best path selection process. When I say when the AS the same, I mean when the next hop AS is the same. Okay, so when we deal with devices, when we deal with, let's say, R1 choosing whether to choose R2 or 3 as his next hop or his best path, he's only going to compare the MED, essentially, if we get down that far. So N Willa Omni. I'm going to keep writing this until you guys got it right. N Willa Omni. Okay, so essentially, now that we're down here at the MED, if we get this far in our best path selection process, what we're going to do is we're going to look and say, okay, are the autonomous systems the same? If the answer is yes, we're going to compare the MED. If the answer is no, then we're not going to compare it. And we're going to simulate that here in this video here today. Now, there is a way around that, and I'm going to show you that command in a minute, but it's BGP always compare MED, and that will compare the MED regardless whether regardless whether this is regardless whether these autonomous systems are the same or not. Now, also keep in mind that by default, okay, this is not compared or not used in a confederation. So I'm just going to say in a confed. Right? And again, I know we haven't gotten to confederations yet, and that's okay. You can change this default behavior as well. And so since we don't have a confederation, I'll go ahead and show you the command to do that, and you can just jot it down if you're ever in that situation. However, I want you guys to remember these two default behaviors of the MED. Okay? Now, how we're going to configure this thing is we are going to go ahead and start by saying ASN2. And actually, you know what? We're going to say 23, and we're going to say ASN 23 for routers 2 and 3. What we'll do here is we'll reverse one of these guys to be 32. Well, it would probably be R3. We'll reverse this guy to be 32 when we're all done. This guy is going to be ASN 1. Okay, so what we'll consider this is we'll consider this maybe our edge point of our network, and this guy, you know, we'll consider these guys maybe our ISPs. And what we're going to do is we're going to, as usual, we're going to redistribute connected from R2 and 3. Because we're going to be messing around and looking at this particular prefix here and see how BGP is going to essentially choose its next path as his best path. Now, I am going to enable a feature called BGP deterministic MED, okay? And I'm not going to write that all down because you're going to see it in the CLI. And the reason why I'm doing that is because BGP does on occasion have an issue. One of the pieces of the BGP best path selection, which I didn't mention, is actually the age of the advertisement. So if R2, and that's why in some, you know, before I said, okay, we should see R2 and we saw R3 because R3 had an older age, and so we were picking R3 instead. Not a big deal as long as you know about it. And so BGP is going to choose the oldest update or oldest advertisement that ends up in the BGP routing table, or the BGP table, I should say. And so by turning on the BGP deterministic MED, we have the ability to change this behavior and say, you know what, I want you to pay attention to the MED, and I want you to ignore essentially this age. If you see somebody come in with a lower MED, and that's another bullet point that I should probably mention, the lower MED wins, okay? So if you see somebody with a lower med, I want you to ignore the fact that maybe R2 has an older advertisement. Don't continue to use R2. I want you to go ahead and ignore the age of R2's advertisement and use R3. So I'm going to go ahead and enable that feature, and I just want to explain that now before we go in and do that. Anytime you're going to use the med as your best path selection, you want to go ahead and you want to enable that feature. So let's go ahead and let's start getting BGP configured. By the way, those of you guys that have not been following along, maybe you're just watching this one video because this is the one that you're always confused about. We are gonna peer with loopback 0. Okay, and we're going to use some static routing in order to make that happen. We're not down to the point where we're going to start playing around with the IGP metric just yet. And so here we're not going to throw OSPF at this thing. We're just going to use some IP routes, okay, some regular static routing to peer with the loopback addresses. So let's go ahead and say router BGP1. We'll say BGP router ID 1.1.1, and let's say redistribute connected, and here's where I'm going to say BGP deterministic med. Again, what that's going to do is say ignore essentially the age of let's actually see if it's in the help menu, BGP deterministic med. So pick the best med path among paths advertised from the neighbor AS. So essentially, you know, it doesn't give us the information I was looking for. What you're saying here is ignore the age and look at the med. You want to pick the best path based on the med. Okay, and that command again is BGP deterministic med. All right. Let's see where we were before I got off the straight and narrow here. Okay, so we'll say neighbor 2.2.2 remote. I believe this is going to be 23. Neighbor 2.2.2 update loopback 0. Neighbor 2.2.2 eBGP multi-hop. Neighbor 3.3.3 remote. That should be 23. And I'm going to say neighbor 3.3.3 update L0. Neighbor 3.3.3 E, and do show run section router BGP should go ahead and give us what that config looks like. So there's our deterministic med. So we're going to make sure we use the med, make sure we essentially ignore the age. Here's our redistribute connected because we want our interfaces to get cranked in, and then here's our neighbor statements to form an adjacency. So we're good to go here. Let's get on to R2 config T router BGP 23 BGP router ID. Again, as I've said before in previous videos, the router ID is not a requirement. It's my OCD habit flaring up. We're going to say redistribute connected to make sure, again, there's going to be more prefixes involved, but we're just looking at the 1024.35, right? Neighbor 1.1.1, and I'm going to say remote autonomous system 1, neighbor 1.1.1, update loopback 0, and I'm going to say neighbor 1.1.1, and we'll say eBGP multi-hop. That should do it over here. Let's go to R3, wake him up, config T, router BGP 23, BGP router ID 3.3.3, and like I said, we are going to change this, so we will go back in, remove this configuration, and go ahead and say 32 instead, because there's another feature that I want to go ahead and show you in BGP, which is, again, I think I mentioned it, the always compare med, because by default, again, the med is only going to be used when that next hop, that first hop, the AS is the same. So if this was 23 and 32, by default the med would not be compared, and you could set it all day long. So neighbor 1.1.1 remote 1, neighbor 1.1.1 update loopback 0, neighbor 1.1.1 eBGP multi-hop, do show run, oh, we forgot redistribute connected, do show run section router BGP. There we go. So let's go ahead and let's check R1, do show IP BGP. And we are getting prefixes, so do show IP BGP summary. We are getting prefixes from 2, but not 3. Let's just say do show IP BGP again. And there's the prefix essentially that we're looking for. So you see the metric here is 0. So while we're waiting for the updates for the advertisements to come in from 3, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and actually set the med or the metric. So I'm going to say neighbor 1.1.1, and I'm going to do this with a route map. So what I'm going to do is say route map and just call it med out. Okay, now obviously I need to create a route map called med, and as you guys have seen before, we could match this with an ACL if we wanted to. I could say match IP address and then go ahead and say 1. I could go ahead and create a prefix list if I wanted to and match it to a prefix list. I'm not going to do that right now. I think we've demoed that a few times in the previous videos. It's essentially the same configuration. So what I'm going to do now is just say set metric. And remember that the lowest metric is going to win. Here, if you take a look, the metric is 0. So, a lot of times folks go to like 100 or whatever. We don't really need to do that because the lower metric is going to win. So what we really need to do is we need to make the other side higher that we want to be less preferred, and then we can go back and forth. So if I go over to R1, do show IP BGP, you can see that R2 right now is being preferred, right? So in theory, when we go in and if we do something like 5 and we make our R2 a higher metric or a higher med, in theory, once we clear this, we should be able to cause this link to go in the other direction or this route to go in the other direction. Okay, so let's do that. Let's say do clear IP BGP star soft out, and we'll go over here and we'll say do clear IP BGP star soft, and then let's say do show IP BGP, and let's see if we flipped it. And there we go. So we have this med. The metric that's now coming in is a 5 because it's higher than the default, which is 0. So it's higher than 3. R3, and when I say higher than 3, I mean R3. Since it's higher than R3, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start using R3, right? So, very, very easy thing to do. We can go ahead and we can flip this back the other way by doing the same exact thing. So we can actually grab this command here, and we can pop it into router 3, and I can go back over here and I can say do show run section route hyphen map, and what I can do is I can just basically grab this and I can say set metric to 10, essentially making the metric of R3 higher, but I can also say match IP address. I said I wasn't going to do this, and we're going to do it anyway. Access list 1 permit 10.25 or 24.35.0000.255 and say do clear IP BGP star soft out. Let's head over here, do clear IP BGP star soft, do show IP BGP. And what we should see is we should see 0 for all of the prefixes. Oh, we forgot, we messed up, right? What did we do? Because we had a match criteria, we forgot the route map that says permit 20. Do clear, let's exit out of here. Clear IP BGP star soft out. Let's go ahead and check R1 once more. Do clear IP BGP star soft. Do show IP BGP. And there we go. So now all of the prefixes have come back with a default metric of 0. But if you take a look here, now the metric here on R3 is 10. So we've made the metric here on R3 higher than everybody else. Okay, so we're going to choose R3 as our best path for other prefixes. So had we been advertising other prefixes here that were being shared between R2 and 3, we would choose R2 for all of them, or I'm sorry, we would choose R3 for all of them because R3 would have the lower med or metric, which would be the default 0, except for this prefix. In this prefix here, R3 would not be chosen. R2 would be chosen because R2 would have the lower metric. Again, he has a 5 because we were playing around, but you guys get the idea, right? So now what we want to do is we want to take a look at this idea of the fact that when we have a different autonomous system, that these guys will not, the med will not by default be compared. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and remove the neighborship from R1, so or R3 rather. So we're going to go ahead and remove this out completely. We'll put it back, okay, but we're going to take it off for now. And then I'm going to say config t do show run section router BGP. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically reverse this and say 32, and then I'm going to put this exact thing. Oh, I forgot to remove it. No router BGP 23, and then what I'm going to do again is reverse this. So router BGP 32, and we'll go ahead and we're actually going to put this entire thing right back. Okay, so same config we had before, just causing it to be a different autonomous system, and we're going to do the same thing over here. We're just going to say 32, and we're going to put all this right back. So it's the same exact config we had before. The only difference is, again, that R3 now has 32 instead of 23. So let's say do show IP BGP summary. I didn't have enough patience. We have it coming back up here. So let's say do show IP BGP summary. We've received 12 prefixes. Do show run section router BGP. There we go. So we have all this set up. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to send this med out of 10, right? Now let's actually fix this because we know that we want R3 to be chosen, right? We know that at this point, in theory, R2, let's say do show IP-BGP and see what we're getting here. R2 is the guy that's being chosen, right? He has a med of 5. R3, in theory, we should not be choosing, or we should not be looking at the med because the autonomous systems are different. So just to prove that, what we're going to do show run section route hyphen map. What we're going to do is we're going to set the med to be lower. So we're going to say set metric, and I'm going to say 3. Okay, so router 3 now has the lower med, has the lower metric here, and let's say do show IP-BGP star soft. I'm sorry, do show IP-BGP. I kind of got my commands mixed up there. And you can see that we are getting the med, right? So we are absolutely getting the med here of 3, but we're using R2. Let's say do clear IP-BGP star soft, and then let's say do show IP-BGP and see if this flops. And it doesn't. Before, when we were messing with it, I don't know if it's still in our buffer up here. It might be if we go all the way up. So here we were using 2. Let's go further up, I think. Yeah, here we go. So we were using 3 up here because it had a 0. We went on to R3. We reconfigured the med. We went here. We cleared our process, and we went back and looked, and lo and behold, we started using 2 because 2 had the lower med than 3. But yet down here, when we clear the process and I say do clear IP-BGP star soft, I'm not flapping back over to 3, even though 3 now has the lower med. The reason is, and let's take a look at this prefix. Let's say do show IP-BGP, and let's actually take a look at this guy. All right, you can see that we are getting this metric here. And by the way, you can also see the local preference and things of that nature if you want to take a deeper look. But the point is that you can clearly see here that we're getting this metric, and you can clearly see it up here as well. Again, the problem being that the autonomous systems are now different. Okay, this guy's coming in from 23. This guy's coming in from 32. What we need to do is we need to tell BGP to always compare med. Okay, now let's say do clear IP-BGP star soft. Let's give it a quick second. Do show IP-BGP, and we may have to clear it hard. Let's see what happens. Let's clear it again. Do clear IP-BGP star soft. And then we'll say do show IP-BGP, and there we go. So I just had to clear it twice. Maybe I didn't have enough patience. And so now, because we've said, okay, I want you to always compare the med, now you can see R3 actually becomes our valid next hop. It becomes the guy that's chosen. He has the lower med, and now we've said, look, just because the autonomous systems are different, I really don't care. I want you to go ahead and choose R3 based on the med anyway. So that's how we can use the med to manipulate our best path. That's how some of the different options and some of the different things in med, if we're going to go ahead and use the metric to tweak our best path. You don't have to go crazy. You don't have to say 110 and 250. I mean, you can do it based on very, very small numbers if you want to. Of course, if you want them to stand out, absolutely, you can use a higher number, right? I mean, there are plenty of people who want a long number to stand out, and so they'll say 1,000 or something like that, so that it, you don't have to look in single digits. I understand that, and I get that. I mean, I do the same thing in production. Point is that you don't have to go very high in order to actually make the adjustment. I'll see you guys in the next video. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I know I am, and I'll see you guys in the next one.